And I hope you had a chance to explore the wonderful features of our conference platform. We are now ready to begin our third and last session of the day. Our distinguished panelists will be participating in our session titled Hopes and Hazards, Digital Transformation in the Region. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this session, a colleague in this fantastic world of journalism that we share, Guillermo Arduino. Guillermo is an anchor, a correspondent for the CNN networks based at the CNN Center in Atlanta. He's the anchor for CNN en Español's daily afternoon show Encuentro. He is also the host of Click, the network's technology program, and the winner of a 2014 Daytime Emmy for Outstanding Entertainment Show in Spanish. Guillermo, welcome, over to you.
Gustavo, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am thinking that, we have so many resources today, and we have the CNN Center, the New York studios, the Miami studios, the Washington Bureau, the Los Angeles Bureau, the Hong Kong Bureau, London, but most of us are at home. So here we have it, and we have coped with it, and we managed to emerge. And that talks about the power of resilience. And that's one of the characteristics that I think we need. If you're young, if you are not very young, and the challenges of adjusting to digitalization, we consider age a lot in this case. And so it's very important to be resilient, and it's very important to adapt. The power of adaptation to the world in general, even before the pandemic, was very important. Well, this pandemic brought about a challenge, obvious challenge, which is to communicate through these devices and through technology as we do. Some who were ready, who adapted before, managed to do it. But with this come also the risk, not only the adaptation and the resilience that we may bring about, also risks in terms of safety, security, threats. But, that's the way it is, and we have to adapt and work it out as well. In Latin America, think about the access to technology, and what is even more important, connectivity. We need an outstanding connectivity in order to excel. If we don't have the kind of connectivity that we have right now in the first world, then clients are going to run away. So that's something that we're going to talk about. So I'm giving you pretty much the overall picture of the conversations that we'll have. We have a lot of experts in this panel that can actually bring about their own experience and their own input to make us think about it and solve. That's the other word. And the disciplines that we can cover comes from banks, financial services, health, education, you name it. So everybody is a player in this case. I want you to meet Kerry Ann Barrett. She's a cybersecurity policy specialist for the Organization of American States. Kerry Ann is a cybersecurity policy specialist in the cybersecurity program within the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism, very important, at the Organization of American States. In her capacity, she offers technical assistance to member states in the development and implementation of their national cybersecurity strategies, as well as assists in the implementation of various technical capacity building initiatives within the cybersecurity program. She's an attorney at law with over 16 years of experience in the Caribbean region, having been appointed to several positions within several government ministries in the Caribbean. Kerry Ann, welcome. We also have Laura Gaviria, Director of SoftBank Group International. Prior to joining SoftBank, she was the Global Head of FinTech Acceleration for Citibank. She also supported tech startups grow and scale as Chief Acceleration Officer at the Venture City and serves as the board of Banco Sol in Bolivia. She has over 18 years of international experience in digital innovation and financial services. Laura, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Also, Ángel Melguizo. He's the Vice President for External and Regulatory Affairs at AT&T DirecTV Latin America. responsible for positioning the company on key regulatory topics for the digital transformation in the region. Before joining AT&T, he was chief economist for Latin America at the OECD Development Center and worked as lead specialist on labor at the Inter-American Development Bank. He served as a senior advisor in the Economic Bureau of Spain's Prime Minister, as well as principal economist at the BBVA Financial Group. Angel, welcome. Silvina Moschini is the founder and president of Transparent Business, among other ventures, a cloud-based platform that manages remote teams, and the founder and CEO of SheWorks. She is part of the World Economic Forum's collaborator agenda and was given the Equals in Tech Award by the United Nations in 2019 for her technological initiatives. She is LinkedIn Influencer, which is a selected group of 500 personalities comprising Richard Branson, Bill Gates, and Arianna Huffington. She has been published and recognized in over 140 media outlets throughout the world, and you can see her on CNN in Espanol very regularly, arguing and enlightening our programs with me particularly. And welcome, Silvina. And last but not least, Robert Morgas. He is a senior director for the US Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Previously, he helped build a New America Cybersecurity Initiative, where he headed the organization's international cyber policy work. Morgas serves as research advisor for the Global Commission on Internet Governance, as well as the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, and has served as expert advisor for the World Economic Forum. Robert, welcome. So because we are in this kind of forum, we're going to go one by one because it would be very complicated to interrupt each other. And I want to start with Kerry Ann, especially based on your cybersecurity expertise. What is the capacity of the region, especially taking into account external threats in a very well communicated and intertwined world from the point of view of technology?
Thanks, Guillermo. I think it's really timely that we're having this session because we literally just launched our 2020 report that gives a regional snapshot of the state of cybersecurity capacity in the region. This report we launched with the IDB, and it's the second edition that assesses the state of cybersecurity readiness. Since the study that we conducted in 2016, what we've discovered now is that more than half of the region has actually started to improve their cybersecurity capacity in one way or the other. Many of them have begun implementing national cybersecurity strategies, which we believe will give a general overview of the direction that the country should go in building capacity. And in some cases, legal frameworks have been put in place, such as cybercrime legislations or guidelines and standards. However, one of the things that the report highlighted for us, though, is that although we've made significant progress in the region, there's still so much more that needs to be done. More than 3/4 of the countries in the region observed that they didn't have any infrastructure to be able to protect critical infrastructure from advanced cybersecurity threats and attacks. One of the economic impact that we noticed is that in Latin America, it's going to be probably 90 billion in 2019 alone that they suffered some amount of impact from cyber incidents. Countries generally lack the capacity to monitor, and that's because many of them don't have what we call incident response teams at the national level. And those incident response teams are what you kind of like your firefighters, the first persons that know that something is happening nationally. And many of them don't have one in place. So like in a snapshot, I think we could say that, just to give you some figures that it will be easier to understand, 17 out of 32 countries have actually promoted public policies and initiatives to strengthen cybersecurity in the region since 2016. Only 6 at the time had national cybersecurity strategies. Today, we have 12. We have 5 that are underway in developing their national cybersecurity strategy at a very advanced level. So the region is picking up and understanding what is needed to address it. I think another thing that I could probably highlight in terms of capacities is there has been many attacks against the banking sector. In a recent report we published, 92% of the banking entities had identified some amount of attacks against their systems. But what's really encouraging from that is that many of them have the capacity to identify it. I think not knowing what is happening to you is even worse than someone telling you that you have an issue. So we do see that there's progress in the region, but more importantly, there's a lot more to go. So capacity is key.
The problem, Karen, is that what you're painting, the picture you're painting is that the region is at a very high level of vulnerability. And we didn't have a warning for this pandemic. So if those numbers emerge from the pre-pandemic era, I wonder, is it a matter of resources, or is it a matter of knowing and understanding at a government level what's going on? Because if we think about banking vulnerabilities, for instance, in today's world, many countries are totally shut down. In the United States, we can go out in big cities like Atlanta, or I was in Charlotte, North Carolina last week, but that's something that you would not be able to do in Argentina, for example. You cannot cross county lines without a permit. So people have to rely entirely on technology. So again, is it a matter of resources or knowledge?
I would honestly tell you, Guillermo, it's a combination of both. Our member states have been pretty resilient in terms of trying to adapt to everyone being forced online, the workforces within government. The resources, it is a lack because many of them have had to prioritize some of the more infrastructure related projects within their country to be able to let their citizens and their nation be able to participate in the global market. But I think another aspect of it is knowledge as well, which is why we've been pushing so many reports out that targets policymakers, which is why we've actually seen an increase in national cybersecurity strategies. So I think as our member states become more aware of what is the threat and how it can impact their digital transformation projects that they're pursuing, it will become a more natural thing for them to start advancing in building more capacity and allocating resources accordingly.
Okay, we go back to this subject. Let me cross over to Laura Gaviria. She's from Colombia. Actually, this is a very interesting multicultural panel. Kerry Ann Barrett represents the United States, even though we are all, if not, we are multinational, but it's important for people to identify with this. Kerry is from the United States and Laura Gaviria is from Colombia. Laura, let's talk about this. The collaboration between the public sector and the private sector is fundamental, especially when we think about power and the muscle to make things happen. So in terms of the digital access of citizens, especially during this pandemic, where do we stand?
I think, Guillermo, you made a very important point. I think there's never been a time where it's more important for the private sector and for the public sector to work at the same side of the table. And it's not enough to have sustainability funds or development funds coming into the region. We need also private capital coming in to fund our entrepreneurs. And we take for granted the fact that we can be connected today via Zoom, or whoever is listening to us today. That connectivity issue, we take it for granted because we live with it. But we have to remember that a lot of citizens in Latin America still don't have access to that connectivity. And for some, that access is almost 50%, could be up to 15% of their income, just that access to bandwidth. So they really can't have the benefits of doing things digitally, which is something that we're having right now. There's a joke, or we keep hearing that coronavirus has been the best chief technology officer, both for companies and for governments. And it's true. And I think that the fact that this pandemic has accelerated impressively the digitalization of services is amazing, and definitely it's going to be able to give access to education to more people that we had before, to be able to bring health services to more people than we had before. But again, we can't forget that we need the basic infrastructure, that connectivity that you mentioned when we started, that to happen. And that's where governments have to come into place. We can come as a private sector in a way to fund those amazing entrepreneurs that we have in the region that are coming with the solutions. But we need that collaboration, not only in terms of providing the basic infrastructure for people to be able to be connected, but also the right regulation for these companies providing this massive services of public service that are going to be crucial for the region to be able to come out stronger out of this crisis.
I was thinking that the government sometimes is so huge and the processes are cumbersome. They sometimes don't understand. I don't know if you remember when we saw the CEO of Facebook in front of the Senate. I think it was last year. It was so clear they didn't have a clue of what he was talking about. And, you know, unfortunately, it's a matter of age as well, because most of them are people of age. And for them, it's very hard to understand how artificial intelligence works, et cetera, et cetera. So I wonder if we take that case and we move it to Latin America, and then governments need to understand that it's for their own benefit to make it easier for companies to go and invest in those countries. And sometimes, if your clients are going to be European or American who do not have any patience at all for a bad signal, they are going to run away. They'll say, okay, if certain country is not providing me with a good connection, I'm going somewhere else where I can do business. So how can the public sector and the business, the private sector now work together to solve it now? Because now we're in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, I think it's this awareness that usually would have taken years for governments to really see it, the necessity of being this digital savvy that has come as one of the only benefits of this pandemic, right? I don't think there's one government in the region right now that doesn't understand the importance of connectivity, the importance of being able to have the right setup for more and more technology companies to thrive, to be able to work remotely, to be able to access a doctor via your phone or your web, right? Now I think it's in the top of the agenda of absolutely every government, and it could have been something that would take longer for some to get there. Some of the examples that we've seen that are amazing is, for example, in Colombia. So far, they've trained more than 1,000 citizens on artificial intelligence just by government grants. This is a program that they did in combination with Correlation One, a company in Boston, and it has been extremely successful. And more people are now being trained in this basic data or technology skills that are needed to bring the countries to another level. We did something similar with SoftBank and again Correlation One, and with the support of the Colombian government as well, to train and upskill more AI experts in the region. We did it with people that participated from Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. It was supposed to be physical. We're gonna have like 3 physical locations in Bogota, Sao Paulo, and Ciudad de Mexico. And when the pandemic kicked in 1 week after we started, we moved the entire thing digitally. And it was seamless. It worked perfectly, so much that now it could be scaled even further. Colombia continues to train more and more people now, and it's becoming something that it's at the center of every government that we have in the region, which I think it's something extremely positive. Now we need to make sure that those permanent regulation changes happen that are going to be easier for more and more people to have access to the services from a digital perspective, and keep being friendly to have our amazing entrepreneurs that we have in Latin America be able to thrive with new, simple, and amazing solutions that they can bring to the citizens.
You gave us some good examples. I'm going to come back to you with some that have some room for growth later. So we'll talk about. I want to ask Angel Melguizo now. Let's see. Angel is from Spain. Angel, obviously, September is a key month. Most companies have to have their budgets for 2021 already totally completed and ready to be presented. So, no doubt we are facing somewhat of a recession. We'll see how long it will take for us to come out of them. And it depends. Some countries are going to take longer, depending on the resources they have and how they were surprised by this pandemic. Now, with the use of technology, we can do something to actually transition into the normal world a little bit faster. How can technology mitigate these effects of a looming recession?
Well, thank you very much. And let me start by saying that we should be relatively optimistic. I mean, it's evident that the region is facing, I would say, the socioeconomic crisis of our lifetimes. I mean, seeing GDP fall 9-10% in 1 year, or just I mean, the cost of the growth that Latin America is not having in 2020, 2021 is around $1 trillion. That to put in context is that the region has lost one Chile, one Peru, one Uruguay in terms of growth versus a scenario with no pandemia. It's evident that we have to take that into account. But we are living a huge contrast. At the same time that we are facing this economic crisis, I mean, technology is in its probably in its most exciting period in terms of the possibilities that it opens. Obviously, we are working, we are getting informed, we are getting entertained, we are getting educated thanks to technology as citizens. Governments are innovating. I have to say that. I mean, governments have really been also innovating in these stress times for everybody. And obviously companies have to move ahead. So our vision is that digitalization is not just to get along. I mean, just to pass these weeks, these months, or almost this year of challenges. Digitalization is the only way forward towards a Latin America, which is more productive and it's more inclusive. So actually, this is what we have to invest, and we have to solve the hurdles. So, paraphrasing the title of our session, I was thinking, which are our hopes and which are the hazards? No, we have two hopes. First, 5G and all that 5G is going to enable is almost here. And two, the development of platforms, the so-called over-the-top OTTs. I mean, we are working, we are communicating, and we will be educated thanks to OTTs. These are two hopes, but we need to overcome the hazards. And the hazards, on our opinion, is that we are investing too little in technology and education, both of them together, and we are not advancing fast enough towards a smart regulation of the digital economy, in which security, privacy are key issues, not the only ones. So, I mean, for us, this is a call. This is a call to be realistic. Many people are suffering in Latin America, and we will be struggling for 2, 3, or 4 years in terms of the economy. But we cannot put on hold all the plans that we have until this passes, because this is going to be, if not permanent, very long lasting.
Yeah, and I was thinking while you were talking about that is something that we talk about with Silvina all the time, no? Working remotely. And I wonder, as an AT&T executive that is expanding in Latin America, that market actually for the work market, the labor market in Latin America now is very appealing, because a United States, employee is very expensive these days. But for that, we need flawless connectivity. To give you an example, when there are shows that are coming out of Argentina or Mexico, I am on standby here in the States, because the infrastructure in those countries, for those who are working from home, is not good enough for the company to say, well, okay, you know, if they have a problem, they can work it out. No, I have to be here because my signal, I have fiber, my signal is better. It's their show, but I have to be on standby. So it's in the best interest of the governments actually to invest in connectivity. So my follow-up question is, are they doing enough? Governments are doing enough to facilitate this digitalization? Can you convince them that this is the present and not the future?
I will do my best to try to convince them. But let me start by saying, I mean, we are passing a stress test of technology, of policies, and I mean, overnight, the internet traffic also here in South America increased 30–40%. And it increased in a place where we were not expecting that traffic. All of us were expecting, internet traffic at your office, but not at home. So actually the stress test has been incredible. And I would say for all of us who are connected, I mean, we are privileged and things are going relatively well, I have to say. But obviously there is the not connected part of Latin America is too big. And I would say there, governments are not doing enough, and companies, we are not doing enough. We have to do more. You know? First, in terms of investment, I mentioned, I mean, the figures that the industry uses are in the orders of hundreds of billions of dollars, which Latin America needs just to put the connectivity levels to the ones of high-income economies. We are talking $150, $160 billion, which in times in which governments are having so many social programs to fund, and in the middle of the economic crisis, this is big money. So this is why government should do it, but we will do them together. I mean, in the US, we fund the CAF too, not the Development Bank CAF, but Connect America's Fund, run by the FCC to connect SMEs and rural areas. I think we have to do the same in Latin America. And I was reading the news that CAF was planning to launch a fund to finance the infrastructure gap in digital and logistics. This is very good news. But I would say we need money, and also we need good ideas, better ideas. And this is why advancing to our regulation is so important.
Yeah, and I think that Silvina Moschini, our next speaker, is going to say, and you need to learn how to never accept no as an answer. That's fundamental, especially in the private sector when you're talking to governments, to say, no, I'm not going to accept a no, and I'm going to continue to knock at doors. Especially if you think today, and Silvina Moschini is like me. She's an Italian family she was born and grew up in Argentina from an Italian family and lives in the United States. So we are the multicultural flower in this context. But you know what, Silvina, I was thinking that governments now, especially in Latin America, are thinking about their health system first and foremost. And in many cases, it is broken. And they are trying to avoid the collapse of the health systems in hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to convince them to invest in connectivity and digitalization, because they need to continue to give a stimulus to the economy, how can you tell them, you know, this is what we need. We need to innovate, and despite what's going on with the pandemic, how do you address that?
Well, I would say we need to innovate because of what is going on the pandemic. I think that, as Laura said, like, pandemic is the biggest accelerator for the digital transformation of all times, that change things that were seen or perceived in the past as to be a vitamin to become an aspirin. This is especially important for the health space, for the solutions that need to be addressed to protect people, to have information to treat the disease, but also to prevent. And what is my area of expertise is to keep people off the streets by facilitating remote work opportunities and making sure that they keep their distance by keeping them at home is one thing that need to be done until they are truly prepared for that. But I think that everybody realized that they have no option. As Eric Smith said, scarcity breeds clarity. So in that sense, many people were forced out of their comfort zone. And as Laura was mentioning, the learning, we discussed that in the past. And I said, like, why the hell are they doing this in physical offices? This is not scalable. With physical presence education, it's kind of absurd in the digital age. And they say, no, it cannot be done. But then it was proven that it could be done. And the same thing happened with telemedicine. The same thing happened with the world of work. People before, and I know because I sell that thing, said like, oh, no, we cannot do it. Our culture will not allow for remote work. We need to see people physically present, warming up the chair in an office, because this job for security, for infrastructure, for culture, for workflows cannot be done remotely. But they realized that it could be done remotely and that it's even better. So I think that this change, this shift from a vitamin that will make economies a bit better to an aspirin that will drive the transformation because of government or business continuity was the key factor to make change happen. So I don't think that it will need a lot of convincing, because they are either in or they are out of the economy. So if they want to be in, they need to digitally transform themselves.
Silvina mentioned a lot of phrases that I learned when I moved to the United States 25 years ago. Make it happen. That's it. It's up to you. You have to make it happen. These are things that culturally we learn in the States, and that's why we love this country so much. Now, Silvina, when I was listening to you, I was thinking, okay, so try to convince a university professor that he or she can test 150 students electronically in 2 hours. And then I was thinking, what Silvina is telling us is that the whole system needs to change, not to adapt the technology that we have today at the structure that we have lived with for so many years, but we need to change the way we think and then use technology. Am I right?
I think that we need to change our operating system, as you said, that we don't need to use technology to try to adapt and replicate the real experience, but you think remote first. And when you think remote first, you manage companies. As I run a company that is remote first, I never have an office. I went occasionally to WeWork or sometimes to some friend's office just to hang out there, but I never have an office. I never thought that I will be limited geographically by the talent that I need to have, because I wanted to have the best person for the job. Hoping, as you know, I work in women economic empowerment, that it will be a woman, but I was hoping to find talent with no barriers, with no limitations, with flexible schedule. So I think that if you change the way you approach getting things done and think on how you build exponential organizations, you need to think remote first. You need to think remote first, change the workflows, and then leverage from the many opportunities in cost savings, in access to talent, in productivity increases, in documentation, in business continuity through the data. When you digitize your workflows, and this applies to the way you teach and the way you work and the way you do absolutely everything, it's much more efficient and it's a lot easier. But the most important, and this is something that we encounter a lot, and now, as you can imagine, we have a massive growth in demand of our services, because before I had to basically justify and explain and try to convince people that they could do better. But now what we encounter as the most important thing is the digital transformation when it comes to the cultural change, the way people embrace the technology. The technology existed for many years. Now we need to change them to work in an agile manner, to think agile, to learn agility, to develop skills that before were important, but they were not like deal breakers, like learnability, design thinking, analytical ability to make decisions with little information without grabbing a colleague from the shoulder and ask them to walk through something because you need to resolve on your own, or you just need to ping someone and get it done. So I think that this is the most important thing, the change of mindset, and then you embrace the technology to make it happen, but you need to change the way you approach getting things done.
Very briefly, when you try to position your platforms of remote work, especially for women, that's something that we haven't talked about, what is the reaction that you get from governments? Is it difficult to make them understand, especially in Latin America, or they embrace this and they are surrounded by good advice and advisors who understand what's going on in the world today?
In the past, it was challenging. It was much more of a PR opportunity. As you know, my background is in public affairs and public relations, so I deal with that and I try to evangelize. But right now, it's make business sense. Women are the most affected by job losses, and women are receiving today higher number of degrees, both university and master's degrees. And as it could be proven that that work can be done remotely, they can achieve a work-life balance. So government and especially multilaterals are supporting this type of initiative. We're working with the government of Colombia and the Senate training women in skills for employability. We are working also with the government of Guatemala, with the IDB on same programs to create the training, to create them talent marketplaces, and then to connect them with global jobs. So they understand that now they have the opportunity to do what India have done 30 years ago with
Right.
outsourcing, but doing it with cloud sourcing, exporting talent in the cloud. And Latin America have talent. And as you know, Guille, talent is universal, but opportunities are not. So we have a massive opportunity to get our people in the region exporting services all over the world now.
It's more or less like we have to prepare for the opportunity. So when the opportunity comes, we can take advantage of it. Usually we focus on looking for the opportunity. When it comes, we're not ready. So this is a time to reflect upon that and to get ready. I want to introduce to you Robert Morgas. He's from the United States. He's Senior Director of US Cyberspace Solarium Commission. And in a way, we touch a little bit the subject that we talked about with Kerry Ann at the beginning, and it's cybersecurity. And I want to ask you, first of all, what is the concept of critical infrastructure? When you think about that concept, what do you think about?
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Guillermo, and thank you to CAF and Dialogue for putting this together. It's been a very interesting conversation already. And I would just say, we talked a lot about digitization and the merits and the value of digitization here. And I think, you know, it's undeniable that we see great economic gains, we see people's lives improve. At the same time, there's a flip side to that coin, and that is that digitization opens us, whether it's us as individuals, whether it's us as businesses, whether it's us as governments, up to new and profound vulnerabilities that we've seen adversaries begin to exploit to disrupt daily life, to destroy private lives, and to disrupt critical infrastructure. And to your point, critical infrastructure, without resilient, robust, and reliable critical infrastructure, digitization becomes somewhat moot, right? So digital or critical infrastructure in the United States, there are 16 sectors. I think in the context of digitization and sort of digital services, there are a few that are particularly important. And without these, you don't have digitization. You don't have effective digitization. You don't have a trusted ecosystem. Things like power, right? We talk oftentimes about telecommunications networks and the sort of backbone of the internet as the primary critical infrastructure when it comes to digitization. You can't have any of that without power. Power is instrumental. At the same time, we're beginning to digitize the delivery of some of our power services. We're beginning to automate certain power distribution and power production. If that becomes vulnerable, or if that is attacked and disrupted, the digitization that we just incurred is moot, right? It doesn't matter. We don't have access to that. When the United States is now in sort of a very critical juncture where we have, for the most part, done a good job of digitizing. I think, we're one of the leaders in that space, but we're also slowly beginning to realize that with that digitization comes this new vulnerability. And that's really the purpose that the commission that I'm a part of was stood up to address. Basically, we came to realize that despite numerous criminal indictments, economic sanctions, the development of robust cyber defensive capabilities, attacks against the United States and frankly our partners both in the region and in Europe and in Asia have continued. We've seen Chinese cyber operators continue to steal intellectual property. We've seen Russian operators disrupt democracies here in South America, in Europe, increasingly now in Asia as well. And the United States, with our partners, hasn't necessarily devised a great strategic approach to really combat that aggression. The task of the commission, therefore, was to begin to develop a strategic approach whereby we could do that. And we developed this strategic approach, which we launched with a paper in March, and we highlighted really 6 key pillars for any country. And we obviously were focused on the United States, but I think these lessons are applicable across the region as well. 6 key pillars to a cyber strategy. And I think if you're going to digitize, you need that cyber strategy, to Kerry Ann's point, because without it, you are leaving yourself open to massive disruption. First is you need to get your government structures right. And this includes the regulations that Angel and Silvina and Laura were all talking about. You need to get your government structures right in order to have the right regulations in place. The second big piece is revolves around international engagement. Obviously, cyber is an international issue. You need to engage robustly, not only with your friends and partners, but you need to understand what your adversaries might be wanting to do to you, right? So you need that robust engagement. The third piece, and I think this is one of the most critical that we can talk about, is the need to build national resiliency. The COVID pandemic is a great beta test for national resiliency, not just in the United States, but across the world. Yes, it has taught us many things about cybersecurity and connectivity, about the importance of digital services. But to your point early on in the conversation, Guillermo, it's also disrupted our economies. And no country in the world really was prepared for the economic disruption that we incurred due to COVID-19. One of the things that the Commission is looking at is, okay, we have in the United States robust plans in place to ensure the continuity of our government, to ensure the continuity of our military operations. Yet the economy is a critical and important pillar of national power, of national continuity, and we don't have plans in place to ensure the continuity of the economy. That's something that we're talking about now in the United States. In addition to that, we need to have a better handle on how we assess risks, not just cyber risks, but risks that will affect cyberspace and digitization. The other big piece of this is the cyber ecosystem itself. This is sort of the fourth pillar of our strategy, and that is the IT, the telecommunications networks that make up the digital sphere, right? So it's everything from the notebook and the laptop and the smartphone, but also increasingly the Internet of Things that are all generally deployed incredibly vulnerably, right? So we don't do a good job of baking in security into our information technology before we deploy it into the ecosystem. That's something we need to reassess and think about how we can do more secure by design. And then the final piece that really runs through all of this is the importance of, and I think we've already touched on this several times with Angel, Sabina, and Laura, and Kerry Ann brought it up as well, is the importance of public-private collaboration to make this happen, right? Oftentimes in the United States, we talk about the need for PPP, for public-private partnership. We've done very little to actually institutionalize and operationalize public-private collaboration on the cyber defensive front, on the digitization front. And a few things that we're talking about from the Commission's perspective on the sort of public-private side is, despite us, the United States, making great gains in certain areas in digitization, many rural communities in the United States, for example, are still lacking with digital infrastructure, whether it's the telecommunications networks or sort of the e-governance stuff that we talk about, whether it's sort of the need to collect benefits or go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, right? A lot of this can't be done online, especially in rural communities. Managed service providers, cloud service providers are a potential great multiplier and unlocker of greater digitization. And there's an added benefit to that, right? If the government is trying to do it on its own, my assessment of their ability to do it securely is very, very minimal. They probably won't be able to, but if you utilize these scaled enablers like cloud service providers, like managed service providers to deploy your digital services, many of them are well-versed in how they actually secure those services, and you'll have a more secure outcome at the end of the day.
It's very interesting when you point out the 1 to 6 different pillars to have a secure cyber ecosystem. And I'm wondering, when you're talking about this, it's fine from a technological point of view. Now, what about the human element? Because when you emphasized on the private-public sector collaboration that everybody touched, I wonder if there is an understanding from the knowledge point of view more than all these technological aspects. So let's take it even simpler. Me as an employee, I can make a big mistake with a company's system. I can actually put my company in a very vulnerable position by making a mistake. I can log in a hotel with a Wi-Fi connection and go into a non-secure platform and compromise a lot of very important information. Needless to say, I can actually compromise my own banking history if I don't do it correctly. So what about that? The dichotomy between the knowledge, the human knowledge, and the technological aspect.
It's a great and super salient point, Guillermo. When I talk about the cyber ecosystem, when I think about the cyber ecosystem, it's three things. It's technology, which we talked about a little bit already. It's people, which you're introducing here, and it's process, right? And yes, a great deal of emphasis needs to be on technology, because that's one way that you can scale, right? If you can build idiot-proof technology, pardon the crudeness of that phrase, but if you can build technology that helps people be more secure in their behavior, you're helping that, right? You're helping the people aspect. But you can't discount the importance of education. But it's not just education, it's education and incentivization, right? You look around the world, not everyone's a digital native, to your point. Not everyone knows how to sort of act responsibly online, whether you are doing it in your personal capacity or whether you're logging in to the hotel Wi-Fi on a work trip, right? Not everyone knows everything to do. That's where the education comes in play. But I would posit to you that there are a great number of people in the world, not just in the United States, but in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, who do have a general sense of what to do, but sometimes it's not convenient. And sometimes it's a little bit more difficult than taking the easy path. And that's where we get into incentivization, right? I think, in the context of businesses, when we talk about incentivization, I think there's a great deal that can be done to incent businesses to take their own personal the cybersecurity of their people more seriously. One of the things, for example, that the commission looked into, and it has potential to bear fruit, but is right now not doing so, is, for example, insurance. Right? So cybersecurity insurance is an increasingly important market in the insurance industry. And what it basically does is protect companies against breaches. Right now, the way that insurance products are written, if a company's a bad actor, if there's a bad actor within the company, if there's a person who's clicking on a bad link, or if there is a person who's logging into the hotel Wi-Fi, they're not necessarily seeing themselves slapped on the wrist from an insurance policy perspective. They're still probably getting their payout. Insurance has a potential to serve a great public policy incentive or sort of quasi-regulatory incentive to get people, to get organizations, and to get companies to adhere to better practices and best practices. Because at the end of the day, I think the way that you're going to incent better practices on a human scale across the board is to work through companies. The way you're going to get companies to incent better practice from their employees, hit their bottom line. Right? And one way to do that is insurance.
My dad was VP of Colgate-Palmolive when he was alive, and he always told me, you have to treat the company's money as if it were your own. And I always think about that. So it comes also with some sort of ethical perspective that you have to learn, and a company should invest a lot in that too. I have 2 minutes, so I want to give 1 minute. Because I kept something pending. Kerry Ann, the pandemic. What are the new threats with the pandemic today?
I think what has happened is that we have more persons in the region going online unprepared. All the students, the teachers who had no clue that they had to suddenly learn these skills. And to what Robert has spoken about in terms of now having to upskill themselves really quickly to know what the threats are and to protect, it's become critical now for governments to invest in people. One of the things that we do in our cybersecurity strategies is that there's an entire component that's dedicated to education and citizen awareness, and to ensure that our curriculum is actually modified and edited to now consider cybersecurity at the very core primary level. Another thing that I see as some of the threats with COVID is our health systems. It's been pushed to the max. And I don't think in the region we're completely ready to digitize, especially all the issues with privacy and protection. So I think even as we have implemented in several countries, Colombia, Uruguay, Chile, even Jamaica have implemented apps to do contact tracing for COVID. The privacy issues associated with that, we're still not ready in terms of how to protect our citizens from that. And I think lastly, one of the challenges that we face is our economy. Many of the investments that we had with all the natural disasters, especially for smaller islands that they have to deal with year in, year out. We have one of the highest hurricane seasons so far. They've actually reached par in terms of storms. And a lot of the Caribbean budgets were dedicated to disaster recovery. Now, crisis management goes beyond disaster recovery for natural disasters. They now have to think about what if they are hit with a type of crisis, now that most of their citizens are online.
Excellent. Thank you, Kerry Ann. We need to entertain questions from the audience. I'm sure that they will have some. If not, I have one pending that I would like to ask. Gustav, can you handle that, please?
Guillermo, we have plenty of questions. Thank you. And thank you, the panelists, for that fascinating discussion. I will turn, as you said, to the audience. Remember, at any moment, you can submit questions directly to our platform by going to the Q&A page. Let's start from the first question. It arrives from Peru, Eduardo Manuel Palacios. He asked, ¿cuáles consideran como condición necesaria para que se produzca, se cree,
necessary conditions to have a worldwide, the sound, the interpreter excuses herself, but the sound is interrupted. I don't know why we don't begin.
About the hypothetical organization, world organization of digital transformation. He asked to our panelists how we could help to create this organization, and if you think it would be productive. Guillermo.
Excellent. Let me pinpoint who would be the perfect person to answer that question. I think that we should go to the private sector. Angel, what do you think?
Yeah, first let me admit I'm a bit jealous because I'm Spanish but Latin American by choice, based in Colombia. So I'm also contributing to this mixture. But more seriously, this is a very right question. I mean, to the point, because we need global regulation. I mean, for many of the issues that we are speaking about. I mean, in terms of security, in terms of privacy, in terms of taxes. I mean, we have to level the playing field, and it makes little sense to have so different regulations in each of the countries in which multinationals operate. But more importantly, because consumers don't care. They don't care where we are established. They want a good and secure service. So, I mean, obviously, this matches very well this principle of a smart regulation to be global. And I would say, I mean, we have the ITU, we have the OECD speaking in terms of taxes. We have some of the other, I mean, business agreements, both APEC and also in the region. I wouldn't multiply. I would actually synthesize the value added that some of these organizations are already doing and coordinate a bit more. But right to the point, not more institutions, but really the approach to be global is needed, and we cannot wait. That was my point. We cannot wait until this COVID thing is over. This is happening today. We are creating a lot of data today. What is happening with this data, and what is happening with the businesses that are making money out of it?
We have to simplify. I think that's the summary of it as well. Gustav?
Ana Carolina Ramirez. She asked, how can we lower access to technology inequalities in the region? Mainly, she said, in rural areas where IT access is extremely complicated due to geographic constraints and almost non-existing IT infrastructure networks. Ana Carolina Ramírez nos pregunta cómo podemos reducir las diferencias, las inequidades en tecnología en la región, especialmente.
Reduce the inequalities in the region, especially in rural areas where there is no infrastructure and where the geography doesn't help either.
Robert, you touched on it, and I think you can expand a little bit, right?
Certainly, yeah. And I think the United States maybe has a good lesson for the region on this front. We have faced the same issue, whether it's from telephones and whatnot, and telecommunications infrastructure. And frankly, what we found is that the market incentives aren't there, right? There's no incentive for a private company to run a cable all the way through rural Texas, all the way through rural Kansas to a single household. At that point, that's part of the role of the FCC in the United States. We have several funds, and government investment basically provides a backstop that incentivizes folks in the private sector, whether it's Verizon, whether it's AT&T, whether it's T-Mobile, to actually build out their telecommunications networks into rural areas. The market simply is not big enough to incentivize them to do it on their own, and that's been the approach that the United States has taken. That said, I think in certain places in the southern part of the hemisphere, you also, you struggle with the original backbone of the network, and that's an area where I do think there's ripe opportunity for private investment. One thing I would say on that front is when we think about doing this, when we think about rolling out more and more telecommunications network equipment, one mistake that the United States has made, and I think we would be keen to help our partners in the region not make, is oftentimes we opted for the cheapest option. And that sometimes comes to the detriment of the security and the reliability of that particular project, right? So in some cases in the United States, we relied on, for example, Huawei or ZTE to build out our rural telecommunications networks. At this point, we are now seeing questions about the reliability and the security of those networks. It's something that we all sort of now have in the back of our minds and is something to be thinking about as we're rolling out new telecommunications infrastructure in the region.
Laura, do you think that the government should play a role, especially in those rural areas that are not of much interest for the public sector because of the earnings that they can come along with?
No, I think I agree with Robert, which is it's a combination. It's that partnership in order to be able to come up with innovative solutions from the private sector that could be used from the citizens that are in remote areas. It needs to have the basic infrastructure, and that basic infrastructure in terms of connectivity, bandwidth, needs to come from the government. And the effort from the private sector is figuring out what are the best entrepreneurs to fund that are going to bring solutions that apply for all, right? But it has to come also with the support of the public sector.
Yeah, exactly. The fluid conversation, right? Gustav?
Victor Falguera from Barcelona. We know the need to digitalize business processes and create new digital business models to recover the economy. But he added, at the same time, the pandemic has increased the digital gap. If the economy is increasingly digital, how can we avoid going toward a world definitely divided in terms of digital skills? Víctor, desde Barcelona, Víctor Falguera, nos dice que está claro que tenemos que digitalizar los procesos de nuestros negocios y crear nuevos...
Digitalize our businesses and create new business models that are digital to recover the economy. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that the pandemic has contributed to the digital gap. If the economy is more and more digital each time, how can we go towards a world that is more digital and avoid that gap between those that have it and not?
When you talk to your potential clients or governments that are going to push for your initiatives?
Well, internet is the biggest equalizer of all time, so it creates a gap if you don't have it. So that's why it's important to have connectivity for all. If you have internet, you can learn online, you can work online, you can sell online. So I think the question is a little rhetoric. I do believe that the baseline for development and for seizing these opportunities to make sure that everyone in this world is connected. If we are connected, we can learn how to change our mindset, how to change our flows, and how to build and accelerate digital transformation in the companies that are already transitioning towards a much more digitally based systems.
So in a way, it's the approach, right? So it's the personal approach, the human approach to it, and then the adaptation, something we talked about before. Gustavo?
Matías Edilberto Camones nos pregunta cómo digitalizar a un país empobrecido cuando el mercado...
He asks how to digitize a poor country when the state, when it falls to a single company.
How can we digitalize a country that has been impoverished by this huge economic crisis, and when the market is under the dominance of one big company?
Kerry Ann, do you think that that's the case in several countries within the region?
There has been, I think in the earliest, because telecommunications was usually predominantly owned by the state company that was the regulator that was rolling out telecommunication lines, it tended to happen. But a lot of the countries have pretty much liberalized their markets. So competition is now coming in. So you'd find that many of them now have regulators to be able to have competitions. I know of several countries now who are still amending their legislation to try and ensure that competition could happen for internet connectivity, for new players to come into the market. And you have countries that the government still owns either 50%, 51% of the telecommunications options that are there. But what's good though, Guillermo and Gustav, is that we now have a lot of players in Latin America coming in, like we have Digicel, you have Claro, you have different mobile entities that are coming in with internet and mobile services that will allow connectivity. So where you may not have landline connectivity throughout some of the countries, a lot of the citizens now have connectivity through their mobile phones.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I go back in time at my days at CNN International, I remember that, for example, phones, analog phones, were used to monitor the progress of AIDS patients in South Africa, for example, way back when. So that's an approach that we are using at that time in order to understand the importance of that digital communication and how important it is, especially for somebody who may live in a remote area and just a phone can get them access to that important information.
If I may, Guillermo,
yes.
I mean, as we need competition. I mean, that's in a nutshell. I mean, the way to increase connectivity is through competition. No doubt about it. So in countries where the dominance of a big player is too much, I mean, regulation should be pro competition. Now, competition has really changed, as you are mentioning. I mean, we are using the very different technologies for the same service. So we have to modernize also what competition means and how we measure it and how we regulate it is. So for instance, we have big platforms that are right now offering telecommunication or communication services. It's important to modernize that thing. But I mean, I see no other way to improve, I mean, connectivity than through competition and more competition.
And for AT&T, it's a very interesting market because Latin America is actually very in its early stages compared to other regions, even though Latin America has a lot of young consumers who are connected to mobile phones and mobile platforms much better than any other already established economies in the world. So in a way, it's the virgin land that needs to be trained and that you need to offer them a lot of products for them to use because they are very eager to continue this conversation on the mobile platforms. And I see it firsthand because I see how with our shows, with CNN, how it's the consumption, the use of mobile platforms for news is amazing. And for communication, there are a lot of opportunities over there. Let's go back to Gustavo for another question.
This one is a very good one, and I'm sure that it applies to people from Buenos Aires to Ottawa or from Berlin to Los Angeles. Mariano Alba from Peru. He asked, in our countries, in our job environments, we live with different generations. How that digital transformation would be in those environments?
Are you going to ask that in Spanish as well? Are you going to translate it?
Okay, yeah, sorry. De Perú, Mariano Alba nos pregunta.
From Peru, Mariano Alvaro asks, in our countries, in our workplaces, there are different generations together. And so Mariano asks, what will digital transformation be like in those work environments?
Silvina can chime in on this briefly, and then we move on to somebody else.
Thank you, Gisha. I think that one important data to keep in mind is that by the next 3 years, 75% of the workforce will be millennials. And millennials, unlike us that are millennials at heart, that believe that 40 are the new 20s, are people that were born digital. So they are very digitally savvy. So I think that they will play an important role in helping the older generations adapt. But also keep in mind that the demographics will be the massive actor in the continuation of this transformation, because the people that will remain in the next few years in the workforce will be people that were born digitally.
Laura, what do you think?
I've seen it firsthand with my mother. She has like a tiny cheese factory, and she used to sell cheeses offline. It's a tiny thing that she has in her farm. And when it became all digital, she had to participate now in the fairs, not physically, but having a website, needing to set through the internet, using social media, and she'd have no clue. The people who worked in her factory are all people from rural areas, so they did have no digital training. So it was me scrambling to help us set up these things, right? And it doesn't mean that they can't learn. It thinks that more and more people who are older need to have access to educational tools that are tailored for them and that are extremely practical to be able to apply. And I think we need to start giving them access to that. One of the things that it's basic is that Google doesn't care how old you are. Google doesn't care if you're poor or not. It gives you the answers to all your questions in terms of how to do X, Y, and Z very easily. We need to get them the chance to have access to those tools and to have the necessary skills to upskill. I agree with Silvina. Millennials are the ones who are going to dominate the workforce. We can't forget about people that are getting older without those digital skills. So we need to also figure out a way to provide them those skills in an easier way. And we see more and more companies and educational and digital educational space that are being able to bring these programs forward that are apt for people who have no basic skills in technology to be able to quickly adapt their business, sell online, and do whatever they need to do. We just need to make sure that they know where to get that information.
Angel, how are we transitioning or incorporating smart assistants like Google Home or Alexa into the mix? Because I was thinking, as Laura was talking about, that for an older person to get a phone or a computer, a screen and ask a question is a little bit more difficult than to say, hey, Google, how can I do this? Stuff like that. It would be easier, right?
No, absolutely, and this touches the other investment that I think we need, that is very much in line with what Laura and Silvina were mentioning, and it's education, human capital, and this is not formal education. We are not talking about 4, 5, 6 years of university degrees. We are talking about training on the things that the digitalized economy, not the digital sector, the digitalized economy, the digitalized society are required. I mean, 2 or 3 days ago, LinkedIn released their skills gap. That is, what are the skills that are lagging the workers of today? In a region, by the way, which is the one with the highest skills gap in the world. 4 in 10 companies say, I'm looking for a guy or a woman, but I don't find them with the skills they have. Soft skills, analytical, and basic digital capabilities. So basically to understand as users, as workers, as consumers, how technology works, the risk and the opportunities they need is something that is critical, and we cannot wait for 6 years for the universities to launch programs. We need 6 months programs where obviously we will partner. We will be more than happy to partner with governments, with the ministries, in order to train. Because if not, I mean, all these opportunities are going to be just focused on some of us who are in this meeting and not with the rest.
Things are changing, though.
Guillermo, can I chime in there?
Yeah, Robert, go ahead.
As well, just because I think I want to underscore a point that I think both Angel and Laura made, and Silvina as well, and that is that the goal here should not be to turn coal miners into coders. And this is something that the United States was, again, slow to realize. We had a couple of programs in my home state of Virginia where we have a coal mining industry. And we said, well, those jobs are going away. So we need to figure out a new job for these people. And instead of trying to figure out how to build sort of digital citizenry and digital competency, we said, okay, let's turn them into digital workers. And that was a completely wrong approach, right? And I think Angel is absolutely right in outlining it. The goal here is not to create coders. It's not to create software designers out of these people. It's not to reskill them. It's to give them the skills that they need to thrive and survive in today's workplace.
And if I can add, Guillermo, and I'm sorry, it's just that a topic that I'm super passionate about as well. And actually, we recently launched with the founder of Rappi, with Sebastián Mejía. with Ralph Wenzel, who is one of the managing partners of SoftBank Latam, myself and other entrepreneurs. We launched a foundation called Impacto. And some of the things that we're working on is on launching initiatives that are going to help people who are affected by the pandemic somehow. And one of the main things that we see is losing your job, but being very complicated for you to find a new one because you don't have the digital skills to do that. And those digital skills is not learning to code. It could be very basic stuff that are now digital for be able to cope with the environment. So we're also going to launch at the end of this month a program to train over 1,000 citizens in Colombia, Mexico, and Brazil on those basic digital skills that help you in this economy.
And Guillermo, to further add on that, I think it's extremely important, the point, because it's not about the tech skill, it's about thinking differently. And one example of that is how you help, for example, something that we are doing with Leonisa, the daughters of the women that sold via catalogs the products of the company to sell via remote selling. So how can they embrace the tools and how they think digitally to turn their businesses? Because when you think of jobs, sometimes you think about being an employee, but these people could be an autonomous worker, it can be a small business owner that now have a global market at their disposal if they embrace the technology and they turn their traditionally analogic or brick and mortar businesses into digital. So it's helping people to think of becoming much more like an independence and entrepreneurs nations, even though they are a one-person entrepreneur on their own.
You are your own entrepreneur. Gustavo, I think we go with the final question.
Cool. Liliana Cordova, she asked, what are the major threats of the digital transformation for governments and companies? Liliana Córdoba nos pregunta, ¿cuáles son los mayores riesgos de la transformación digital para gobiernos?
What are the biggest risks of the digital transformation for governments and companies?
Kerry Ann?
Sorry, the translation was still going.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. I think one of the biggest risks is probably to tie back to the question before. It's an unconventional answer I'll give you. I think one of the biggest risks is missing that balance that needs to happen. Having a strategic approach now, recognizing that it's not that we all have to now just go digital and it's going to be completely digital from here on out. It's recognizing that there's still room and need for interaction from the human perspective. So figuring out how to balance workers still being able to transition online and still deliver effectively, but still working out how do I continue some of my other programs that does require in-person contact, that does require persons to have the tools, as Laura and Sylvania spoke about. And I think the biggest challenge is how do I now stop and be strategic? Many of them have just been reactive. And I think the reactiveness has been because there's lives at risk, and the reactiveness has forced a lot of unsecure decisions and onboarding of digital solutions that are not checked securely, that are not tested, that have no bandwidth in terms of the volume of persons that need to be on board. So some of the biggest challenges from my perspective is, one, going back to the board and actually starting to strategically plan going forward now that we've gotten over the reactive approach to COVID, and to now think, how do we build on this with all the other plans that we had to move our countries forward digitally. And I think the last challenge I see is recognizing that the education that's needed for our students. We spoke about the millennials being the next generation, but coming out of school and still not being skilled and still being taught an old curriculum that can't help them. It's now, how do governments partner with private sector to get the right technologies, curriculum changes into schools so we can bring a sustainable workforce going forward, a workforce that, one, has the knowledge and the experiences from the generations before, but two, has the skill sets for the future and what we have to embrace.
And it's interesting that the topic of this session was hopes and hazards, no? Concerning the digital transformation. We started talking about the hazards and we ended talking about hopes. And I think it's very enlightening. And at the same time, I think that what you guys, everybody that has been listening to these distinguished speakers, must take all this knowledge and do something with it, not move on and move on to the next task. Try to reflect on it and see how we can come out of this crisis. I want to thank Kerry Ann Barrett, Laura Gaviria, Ángel Melguizo, Silvina Moschini, and Robert Morgas. Thank you very much indeed.
Gracias, Guillermo.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias a
Thank you.
todos.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Gustavo?
Thank you, Guillermo, and thank you for all our panelists. And thanks to everyone for joining us for the second day of this 24th Annual CAF Conference. We hope you enjoyed today's session, and we hope to see you back here tomorrow morning for the last day. Today, we started our sessions hearing about the importance of having strong public health systems to face with this pandemic. We also talk about the climate change, how to also deal with the challenges of the climate change in our world. And we finish talking about the challenges of the digital transformation that helps us to deal also with this pandemic and all these burdens that has imposed on us. Thank you to our media partners, El País, America Economía, and NTN 24, the international news channel. We have a great agenda on tap with another impressive lineup of distinguished speakers. Tomorrow's sessions will address the impact of the pandemic on democracy and implications of the US election for the region. We'll see you again tomorrow at 10 Eastern Time. Thanks for watching.